12 foods you should never keep in the fridge. The silent mistake that may be compromising your health. Have you ever wondered if you're storing food the right way? Could that innocent habit of putting everything in the fridge be sabotaging your health? And most importantly, what you do with food may be making you sicker than you think. It may seem like an exaggeration, but what if what you consider safe is actually increasing the risks of silent diseases? According to the CDC, nearly 48 million Americans fall ill every year from foodborne illness, and more than 3,000 die. Most of these victims are elderly. And do you know where many of these dangers begin? In your own refrigerator. Recent studies show that storing certain foods in cold environments can cause loss of nutrients, chemical changes, and even generate compounds that are harmful to health. But calm down. This video will help you identify the biggest villains hiding in your refrigerator. Let's get started. 1. Frozen tomatoes. Lost flavor. The mistake that ruins your dishes. Tomatoes are an essential part of many families' daily diet. Whether in salad, dressing, or juice, they offer flavor, color, and nutrition. But what few people know is that by putting tomatoes in the fridge, you're basically destroying everything they have best. The explanation lies in the biology of the fruit itself. Tomatoes are tropical and were not made to withstand the cold. When you put them in the refrigerator, the low temperatures disrupt the natural ripening process, and it is precisely during this ripening that the tomato develops its aromatic compounds, that is, the flavor. Without this, the tomato loses its grace. It becomes tasteless, watery, and with an unpleasant texture, often crumbling at the touch of the knife. In addition, studies show that vitamin C, one of the main nutrients in tomatoes, degrades faster in cold environments. In other words, what was once an ally for the immune system can become just a piece of pulp with no real benefits. Another important detail is the appearance. The cold causes changes in the tomato skin, which begins to wrinkle and darken. Even when it's still relatively fresh on the inside, on the outside, it already looks old and withered. But the biggest problem may be in your perception. When you see the tomato in this state, you may find that it is still fit for consumption and use it normally. But in some cases, the cellular structure may have broken down, creating favorable environments for the growth of microorganisms. Want a juicy, tasty, and nutritious tomato? Store it out of the fridge. Leave it at room temperature, with the stem facing down, in a dry place away from direct light. This simple change can preserve the best he has, and more than that, it can protect your health. Did you think tomatoes in the fridge were the biggest mistake? Wait until you find out what can happen to a food that we use almost every day in the seasoning of food. And that can hide a fatal risk when stored in the wrong way. 2. Honey. The natural sweet that can become a problem. Honey has been known for millennia as a sacred food. Natural, long-lasting, full of therapeutic properties, it has even been used as an antiseptic on wounds. But despite its resistance to time, there's one place where honey simply shouldn't be: the refrigerator. Many people believe that refrigerating honey helps it preserve it for longer. In practice, the opposite happens. The intense cold of the refrigerator accelerates a process called crystallization. In a short time, that golden, viscous liquid turns into a solid, grainy, and unwieldy mass. But the problem goes beyond texture. When honey crystallizes, it can form small pockets of air. These bags, when they come into contact with moisture, such as when the pot is opened and closed several times, create a perfect environment for the development of microorganisms. Poorly stored honey can ferment, acquiring an acidic taste and unpleasant smell. What's more, this fermentation can lead to the formation of toxic compounds, nullifying their natural antibacterial properties. It is worth remembering that pure honey already has an acidic pH and low water activity, which normally prevents the growth of bacteria. But the introduction of moisture breaks this balance. In addition, the cold harms the enzymes present in honey, such as glucose oxidase, responsible for part of its antimicrobial action. In other words, refrigerating honey reduces its medicinal properties and transforms a practically eternal food into something unstable. To preserve honey properly, store it in a glass or plastic jar, tightly closed, away from light and excessive heat. Closets and pantries are ideal. Keeping honey out of the refrigerator is a simple attitude, but one that can preserve not only its flavor and texture, but also its integrity as a functional food. If honey, a practically eternal food, can be transformed with the cold, imagine what happens with much more fragile ingredients. The next item is a champion of perks and hidden dangers too. 3. Refrigerated garlic. The superfood that can hide an invisible threat. Garlic is more than a spice. It is one of the most studied foods in science for its medicinal properties. Rich in sulfur compounds, such as allicin, it is considered a true ally of cardiovascular and immune health. But all of this can be compromised by a simple mistake: putting it in the fridge. When you store garlic in a cold, humid environment, two serious problems can arise. The first is early sprouting. When refrigerated, garlic understands that it needs to wake up and begins to germinate. Those green shoots that come out of the garlic cloves not only change the taste, making it more bitter, but also indicate that the structure of the food is deteriorando.com. So, the allicin content decreases and the health benefits are gradually lost. The second, and more alarming, is the risk of bacterial contamination. Minced or crushed garlic, especially when stored in oil and refrigerated, can create a perfect environment for the growth of Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria responsible for botulism. This is a rare but extremely serious disease that affects the nervous system and can be fatal if not treated in time. The FDA has already warned about the risks of storing garlic in oil without specific care, such as the use of acidifiers or immediate consumption. Because of this, the best way to store whole garlic is in a dry, airy place out of direct light, such as a basket or open container in the pantry. If you need to store minced garlic, use it immediately, or store it for a short time in vinegar or lemon juice, and always in the refrigerator, but with quick use. Garlic is too powerful to be battered by the cold. Value each tooth and protect your health with conscious storage. Have you ever heard of a toxin that can cause paralysis and even death? Because it may be forming silently in your fridge right now. And it all starts with something as small as a fresh herb. 4. Basil in the cold. How a fresh herb can turn into a dark and unhealthy mass. Basil is one of the most aromatic and beloved herbs in world cuisine. Present in sauces, salads, and Mediterranean dishes, it brings freshness, flavor, and even antioxidant properties. But its freshness can disappear completely with a simple storage mistake: putting it in the fridge. Basil is extremely sensitive to cold. When exposed to temperatures below 10 degrees, it begins to darken rapidly. Within a few days, the vibrant green leaves turn into a dark, soggy, lifeless mass. This process is called cold injury and is not just aesthetic. Chlorophyll loss and cell degradation also indicate the loss of important nutrients and bioactive compounds. In addition, excess humidity in the refrigerator environment further accelerates deterioration. The leaves become an environment conducive to the development of fungi and bacteria, especially when stored in closed plastic bags. Basil also has a volatile aroma, which is easily lost in the cold. In other words, in addition to losing nutritional value and becoming a microbiological risk, it also loses its main attraction: the intense smell and flavor. But then, how to preserve basil the right way? The ideal is to keep it at room temperature, as if it were a bouquet of flowers. Cut off the ends of the stalks and place them in a glass of water, keeping them out of direct sunlight. Cover loosely with a plastic bag and change the water every couple of days. Thus, it can last up to a week with color, aroma, and flavor preserved. And if you have too many leaves, a safe alternative is to grind them with olive oil and freeze them into cubes for future use. Storing basil in the fridge is like silencing a symphony of flavors. Let him breathe, and he will give you the best of himself. It has lost its aroma. It has lost its flavor. But what about when what's at stake is your most sacred morning ritual? The next revelation will forever change the way you store your coffee. 5. Unflavored coffee. The bitter truth about storing the grounds in the fridge. For many, the day only begins after the first sip of coffee. Whether brewed espresso or in capsules, coffee is more than a drink. It's a ritual. But did you know that storing coffee grounds or beans in the fridge could be completely ruining that experience? Coffee is a highly hygroscopic substance. This means that it easily absorbs moisture and odors around it. In the refrigerator, where there are constant variations in temperature and the presence of various foods, the coffee begins to capture everything, from the smell of onions to the aroma of fruit. This process directly interferes with the flavor of the drink. That fresh, unmistakable aroma of freshly ground coffee gives way to a dull, bitter, and even strange taste. In addition, exposure to moisture causes condensation in the grains and powder. Each time the refrigerator door opens, the change in temperature favors the formation of small drops of water inside the container. Over time, this causes the appearance of fungi and accelerates the oxidation of the coffee's natural oils. These oils are responsible for aromatic compounds and also for health benefits, such as antioxidants known as chlorogenic acids. But in cold, wet environments, these compounds degrade faster. That is, you lose flavor, aroma, and beneficial properties. The best way to store coffee is in an airtight, opaque container, away from light, heat, and moisture. A closed closet or pantry is ideal. And if you buy grains, grind only the amount you will consume in the next few days. Coffee is an art, and like all art, it requires care. By putting it in the fridge, you're not preserving it, you're sabotaging. If even coffee can become a lifeless liquid inside the fridge, imagine what happens to a fruit rich in good fats and precious nutrients. You may be throwing your benefits in the trash without realizing it. 6. Avocado in the cold. How you're killing the benefits of this fruit without knowing it. Avocado is considered by many to be a superfruit. Rich in good fats, vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, it's excellent for heart, brain, and skin health. But even with so many benefits, there is a common mistake that many people make when dealing with it: putting avocados in the fridge before the right time. The avocado, like the banana, is a fruit that continues to ripen even after it is harvested. This process relies on natural enzymes that work best at room temperatures. By putting it in the refrigerator while it is still green, you stop this ripening. The result? A hard, flavorless avocado that never reaches the ideal point of consumption. In addition, the intense cold can cause changes in texture, leaving the pulp with dark spots, hardened parts, and metallic taste. These changes not only compromise the sensory experience, but also affect nutrients. Studies show that prolonged exposure to cold can reduce levels of important bioactive compounds, such as lutein and zeaxanthin, antioxidants that protect the eyes and nervous system. Another risk that is little commented on is the increase in the proliferation of fungi in the skin of already ripe avocados stored in the refrigerator for a long time. The humidity of the indoor environment favors the formation of mold, especially in the region of the handle or stalk. The best way to deal with avocados is simple. Let them ripen outside the fridge. If it is too green, wrap it in newsprint or place it next to a banana, which releases ethylene and accelerates ripening. Only after ripe, and if not consumed immediately, can the avocado be placed in the refrigerator, preferably with the pulp protected by plastic wrap or in a tightly closed jar. This way, you keep the flavor, texture, and all the benefits that make avocado a true nutritional treasure. And it doesn't stop there. The next victim of the cold is present in almost every home, and what it hides when stored in the wrong way can surprise even the most experienced in the kitchen. 7. Potatoes in the cold. What may be hidden in this everyday food? Potatoes are a staple in many homes. Easy to prepare, versatile, and nutritious, it appears in recipes of all kinds, from puree to roast. But what few people know is that storing potatoes in the fridge can turn this common ingredient into a real health trap. The problem starts with the cold. When exposed to low temperatures, potatoes undergo a chemical change that turns their starch into sugar faster than normal. This process, called cold sweetening, changes the flavor and texture of the tuber. But the most worrying thing comes later. When cooking or baking these refrigerated potatoes at high temperatures, the sugars interact with the amino acids present in the food and form a substance called acrylamide. This substance is pointed out by studies as potentially carcinogenic, especially in animals, and is being investigated for its effects in humans. In other words, the simple act of storing potatoes in the refrigerator can increase the formation of a toxic compound at the time of cooking. In addition, the cold also affects the texture of the potatoes. They become softer and grainier on the inside, and often have dark spots, a sign of oxidation and nutrient degradation. And there is still the risk of early budding. The humid environment of the refrigerator favors the appearance of sprouts that, in addition to being bitter, can contain solanine, a natural compound in potatoes that in excess can cause gastrointestinal disorders. The correct way to store potatoes is simple and effective. Keep them in a cool, dry, dark, and airy place, such as a cardboard box or a cloth bag in the pantry. Avoid plastic bags, which retain moisture, and never leave them exposed to light durée de camp. This care, you preserve the flavor, texture, and above all, the safety of this food so present on your table. If potatoes can form suspicious compounds in the cold, get ready. The following food is even more insidious when poorly packaged, and worse, it can contaminate everything around it. 8. Onion in the fridge. The danger that can contaminate all your food onions are among the most used ingredients in the world. It is the basis of stir-fries, broths, and spices, and is hardly lacking in a kitchen. But there is one silent mistake that many people make: storing onions in the refrigerator. And this can cause more problems than you think. The whole onion, with skin, was made to be stored in a dry and ventilated environment. In the refrigerator, the cold and humidity break this logic. The thin skin that protects the bulb begins to absorb moisture from the environment, making the onion more susceptible to deterioration. Come time, it withers, darkens, and its texture becomes soft and sticky. In addition, the humid environment favors the appearance of mold and the proliferation of bacteria, especially if the onion is already cut. And there's more. Onions are rich in volatile sulfur compounds, which release intense odors when exposed to cold. These compounds spread quickly inside the refrigerator and end up impregnating other foods. That's why, many times, fruits, cheeses, and even butter end up with a slight onion taste, even if they're well packaged. If the onion is cut, care must be redoubled. It should be stored in an airtight container and consumed within 2 days. Otherwise, it can become a fertile field for harmful microorganisms. And it is worth remembering that, although some popular myths say that onions absorb toxins from the environment, there is no scientific proof of this. However, what is known is that, when poorly stored, it can indeed become a vector of contamination. The best way to preserve onions is outside the refrigerator, in a dry, dark place with good air circulation. If possible, in a paper bag or wicker basket. This way, you maintain the flavor, avoid waste, and protect your health, and that of the other foods around you. Do you worry about the bread you consume daily? Maybe it should. Because what the refrigerator does to it can go beyond texture. It can compromise your health. 9. Refrigerated bread. Why your sandwich may be making you sick. Bread is present for breakfast, afternoon snack, and often even dinner. It is a simple, comforting food, and part of the routine of millions of people. But there's one habit that could be ruining all of that: storing bread in the fridge. At first glance, it may seem like a good idea. After all, who doesn't want to keep their bread longer? But what many don't know is that the cold in the refrigerator accelerates the aging process of bread, making it harder and flavorless. This happens because of a phenomenon called starch retrogradation. At cold temperatures, starch molecules recrystallize quickly, causing the bread to lose its softness and become dry and crumbly. That nice texture that makes bread so delicious disappears in no time. And the problem does not stop there. When bread is taken out of the refrigerator, it absorbs moisture from the air, creating a perfect environment for mold growth. The danger is that mold is not always visible to the naked eye. Mycotoxins, Toxic substances produced by some types of fungi can be present even in seemingly healthy pieces. These toxins can cause allergic reactions, digestive problems, and in more severe cases, food poisoning. This is especially concerning for the elderly, immunocompromised people, or those with chronic diseases. The solution? Simples. After you consume bread within a few days, stored at room temperature, inside a tightly sealed container, such as a bread box or airtight jar. Now, if you want to keep it for longer, the best option is the freezer. Freeze the bread already sliced and remove only the slices you are going to consume. This way, you avoid dryness, mold, and still preserve the flavor and texture. Bread should feed, not bring risk. Store wisely and enjoy safely. Did you think the damage stopped at the bread? Now let's talk about one of the most precious and healthy ingredients in the modern diet, which can turn into a real poison when stored the wrong way. 10. Olive oil in the cold, the liquid gold that can become silent poison. Olive oil is considered one of the pillars of the Mediterranean diet. Rich in good fats, antioxidants, and anti-inflammatory compounds, it is a true ally of the heart and longevity. But unfortunately, many make a serious mistake, storing this liquid gold in the refrigerator. When exposed to cold, olive oil undergoes a solidification process. It becomes cloudy, thick, and in many cases creates small crystals that make it difficult to use. While this transformation doesn't seem worrisome at first glance, it hides a bigger, invisible risk: accelerated oxidation. Each time the oil is removed from the refrigerator and exposed to ambient heat, it suffers a thermal shock. These constant temperature variations compromise the chemical structure of the oil, and it is at this point that natural antioxidants begin to degrade, making room for the formation of free radicals. Excess free radicals are associated with inflammatory processes, premature cellular aging, and even an increased risk of chronic diseases. In addition, olive oil loses its characteristic aroma, that fruity and slightly spicy touch that signals its purity and quality. Another important point: refrigerated olive oil becomes more difficult to dose. You may end up using more than you need, increasing your caloric intake without realizing it. The good news is that preserving olive oil in the right way is simple. Store it in a cool, dry place, away from the light and heat of the stove. Prefer dark glass or metal packaging, which blocks light and preserves its active compounds for longer. And pay attention to the expiration date. Even stored correctly, olive oil has a limited shelf life. Avoid wasting the benefits of the best vegetable oil available. It can protect your health, but only if you protect it first. 11. Blackened bananas, the bad decision that may be robbing you of your health. Bananas are practical, tasty, and nutritious. Rich in potassium, fiber, B vitamins, and antioxidants, they are especially suitable for the elderly and people with dietary restrictions. But there is a common mistake that can compromise all these benefits: putting bananas in the fridge. At first glance, the intention may seem good, to preserve the fruit for longer. However, bananas are tropical fruits, and their metabolism is not designed to withstand low temperatures. When you put a banana in the fridge before it ripens, the cold paralyzes the enzymes that regulate this process. The fruit has a rigid pulp, a bland flavor, and often a strange, rubbery texture. In addition, the skin darkens quickly, making it look like old fruit, even if it is still green inside. But the most worrying thing is the impact on nutritional quality. Excessive cold can degrade important antioxidant compounds such as dopamine and catechins, two agents that fight oxidative stress and help protect the brain from premature aging. Another risk is the appearance of moisture points inside the peel, which favors the growth of fungi, especially in very ripe bananas. This mold, almost invisible, can quickly spread to other fruits and even to the inside of the pulp. So, how to store bananas the right way? Leave them at room temperature, hanging, or in a well-ventilated fruit bowl. If they ripen too much, and you are not going to consume them immediately, then it is worth freezing them. But always without shell, preferably cut into pieces or stored in airtight jars. Prevent haste or convenience from turning a perfect fruit into a risk desnecessario. Calm. the right care, bananas can continue to be one of the most complete and safe options in your diet. 12. Chilled chilies. How the fridge deactivates the nutritive power of this food. Colorful, crunchy, and full of flavor, peppers bring life to dishes and offer a generous dose of vitamin C, beta-carotene, and antioxidants. They seem like great candidates for the fridge. They're vegetables, right? Errado. In fact, storing peppers in the refrigerator can accelerate their degradation and compromise their nutritional quality. The first sign that something is wrong appears in the texture. Chilled bell peppers begin to wilt, becoming wrinkled and flabby. This happens because the cold breaks the cell walls of the vegetable, causing loss of water and firmness. Instead of crispy and juicy, they become mushy and bland, but the impact does not stop there. Vitamin C, one of the main nutrients in bell peppers, is extremely sensitive to temperature and humidity. When stored in the cold for a long time, they lose much of this essential vitamin for the immune system and skin health. In addition, the humid environment of the refrigerator favors the appearance of mold, especially at the base of the stalk, where water usually accumulates. Bell peppers that appear to be in good shape on the outside may be starting to deteriorate on the inside, especially if they're left in the drawer for several days. Another important detail, the flavor also changes. The intense cold breaks down natural aromatic compounds, reducing the characteristic flavor that makes bell peppers a highlight in dishes. So, what is the best way to preserve? Store whole peppers out of the refrigerator in a cool, dry place as long as they are not overly ripe. If they are already cut, then it is necessary to refrigerate them, but always in tightly closed containers, and for a short time. Now that you know the dangers hidden inside your refrigerator, it's time to rethink every habit, every space, and every food stored without reflection. The change may seem small. Take out a jar, change shelves, avoid the cold where it is not necessary. But the impacts can be profound. Preserving nutrients, avoiding toxic compounds, and keeping flavors alive is one way to take care of your body every day. Health does not depend only on medicines or consultations. It starts with the simple choices made in your kitchen. And above all, it starts with knowledge. Use what you've learned here to reorganize your eating routine more consciously and safely. Consult a nutritionist or healthcare professional whenever you have questions. And remember, a gesture as simple as storing a tomato in the right place can be a giant step towards a healthier life. You deserve this transformation.